The woman who remembered dying. Most people forget. This is by design, or so the old traditions say. The soul drinks from the river of forgetting before it crosses back into a body and arrives in the world clean and unburdened, free to make new mistakes rather than repeat the old ones. Amara did not forget. She was 34 years old, and she remembered every death she had ever died. Not as dreams. She was careful to make this distinction when she spoke of it, which was rarely and only to people she trusted, with the shape of her inner life. Not as flashes or impressions, as memories. Clear and complete and chronological, filed in her mind alongside memories of her childhood and last Tuesday's breakfast, and the particular angle of afternoon light in her mother's kitchen. She had died 23 times before this life. She knew the cause of each death, the approximate year, the sensation of leaving, which was different every time and yet always recognizable. The way a door is a door, regardless of what it looks like. She had never told a living soul. This was not secrecy for its own sake. Amara was not a secretive person. She was warm and direct and laughed easily and had the kind of face that made strangers on trains tell her things. She had simply understood from very early that what she carried was not speakable in the ordinary way. That language, which was built by and for people who lived one life at a time, did not have the right shapes for what she knew. She had tried once at age 7 to tell her mother. She had said, "I died in a fire a long time ago. My name was something else then." Her mother had gone very still in the way of a person who is frightened by something they do not want to be frightened by, and had said, "You've been dreaming, baby." And Amara had looked at her mother's face and understood several things simultaneously. That her mother loved her completely, that her mother could not hold what she was offering, and that this was not a failure of her mother's love, but a limitation of the vessel. She did not try again. She became, instead, a student of the matter, in the only way available to her, through the accumulated records of human beings who had approached, from the outside, what she knew from the inside. She read everything, every tradition, every mystical text, every near-death account, every regression transcript. She read the Tibetan Book of the Dead at 14 and felt the particular vertigo of recognition, not of being told something new, but of finding, in print and bound and attributed to another culture's wisdom, a rough map of territory she had walked herself. The map was incomplete. All the maps were incomplete. They described the territory as it appeared to those who glimpsed it briefly, at death's door, in deep meditation, in the extremities of prayer. And this was valuable. But it was not the same as what she had. She had been through the door. She had been through it 23 times. She knew things the maps didn't show. She knew, for instance, that the forgetting was not always complete. She knew this not only from her own case, but from what she had seen. There was no other word in the space between lives. There were others who retained fragments, impressions, not full memory as she had it, but enough to recognize certain people across the boundary of a new life, enough to feel, upon entering a room or a city or a relationship, the weight of something that had happened there before. Most people called this déjà vu and moved on. She understood it differently. She became a therapist. This was not accidental. She had known, from the time she understood what therapists were, that she would do this work, not because of this life's inclinations, though those aligned, but because she had done it before. In one life, she had been a healer. In another, a midwife. In a third, something that her current language did not have a clean word for. A person who sat with the dying and helped them remember that they had done this before, that the door was not an ending. She was very good at her work. Her patients did not know why they trusted her so completely, or why her silences felt different from other therapists' silences, inhabited rather than merely patient. They knew only that she seemed to understand something about what it meant to carry a thing, to hold a weight that had no name and nowhere to be set down. She did understand. She had been carrying it for 34 years in this life, and 23 deaths before it. The trouble began with a patient she will call, in the account she eventually wrote but never published, simply R. R was 41, a software engineer, referred by his GP for persistent anxiety and what he described as episodes of, he used air quotes, embarrassed, wrongness. A feeling, he said, that his life was a coat that didn't quite fit, that he had arrived somewhere other than where he was supposed to be. Amara recognized this immediately, not diagnostically. The clinical presentation was unremarkable. Straightforward anxiety with existential features, the kind of thing she saw regularly. What she recognized was the specific texture of his wrongness. She had felt it herself in other lives. The disorientation of arriving in a new body in a new century, with the residue of a previous existence still adhering, like someone else's perfume on borrowed clothes. She said nothing about this. She was his therapist. Her job was to help him find his own framework for his experience, not to offer hers. But in their fourth session, he said something that stopped her breath. He said, "I keep dreaming about a woman. I don't know who she is. But in the dream, I know her. I've known her a very long time. And she's always leaving. In the dream, she's always at a door. And I know she's going through it. And I can't stop her. And I don't understand why I can't stop her." Amara did not move. She said, in the level voice she had spent years cultivating, "What does the door look like?" He described it. Wood, dark. A particular brass handle, worn smooth on one side, set into a stone wall in a place that felt like, he paused, like somewhere that was very old and no longer existed. Amara had died in a doorway like that, 14 lives ago, in a place that was now under a city that had been built over the ruins of another city. She had stood at a door with a worn brass handle and gone through it and not come back. And there had been someone on the other side of it, on the wrong side, the staying side, who she had known very well for a very long time. She kept her face still. "That sounds like a significant dream," she said. "Do you have it often?" "Every week," he said. "Sometimes twice a week. It doesn't feel like a dream. That's the thing." He looked at her with the expression of someone who knows they are about to say something that sounds irrational and is going to say it anyway. "It feels like a memory." "Whose memory?" she asked. He was quiet for a long time. "Mine," he said finally. "But not from this life." She referred him to a colleague. She did this within the week, carefully and professionally, citing a potential therapeutic boundary issue without specifying its nature. Her colleague was excellent. R was in good hands. She monitored this from the appropriate distance and felt simultaneously the rightness of the professional decision and something else that she did not examine too closely, because examining it would require her to acknowledge things she had spent 34 years not acknowledging. She had recognized him. Not his face. Faces changed. Not his name. Names changed. Something older than faces and names. Something that had been consistent across 14 lives, across whatever expanse of time separated the doorway in the stone wall from this clean office with its neutral colors and its tissue box and its two people trying very hard to stay on the correct side of a professional boundary. She began writing. She had never written about what she knew. She had read everything, but she had never contributed, had always understood her knowledge as private, unshareable, a gift or a burden, or both that was hers alone to manage. But now, something had shifted. A crack in the wall she had built so carefully. She wrote carefully and honestly about what it was like to remember, not the content of the memories, those she kept to herself, but the structure of it, what it did to a life to carry this, how you developed over years and lives, a way of holding it that allowed you to function, to love people, to eat breakfast and answer emails, and be present in a life that was not haunted, but was the word she kept coming back to, layered. She wrote about the maps, their incompleteness, the things they didn't show. She wrote about the forgetting and why it existed and what she believed. She was careful to frame it as belief, not knowledge, though the line was difficult to locate. It was for protection, she thought. The soul arrived without the weight of previous mistakes, so that it could make this life's choices freely, without the distortion of accumulated consequence. The forgetting was mercy, and she had been denied that mercy. Why? She had asked this question at various points in all 34 years and had not yet found an answer she was sure of. She had theories that there was something she was supposed to do with what she remembered, some purpose that required the knowledge, that she had chosen this in the space between lives for reasons that made sense there and were obscure here, that it was simply an anomaly, a misfire in whatever mechanism produced the forgetting, and she had made meaning of what was merely error. She did not know which theory was true. She suspected they were all partially true, and none of them completely. She finished writing in the early hours of a morning in late October. She read what she had written. It was not a paper. It had no citations, no methodology, no conclusions that could be tested. It was a testimony, a record, written for no reader she could name, which she had learned over the course of writing it, was the only way to be fully honest. She did not know what to do with it. She left it on her desk and went to make tea, and stood in her kitchen, watching the water come to a boil, and thinking about the door with the worn brass handle, about the face she had not quite looked at in the therapy session, about the patient who had used the word memory and meant it the same way she meant it, about the river of forgetting, which she had somehow crossed dry, about what that meant for what came next. She poured her tea. She went back to her desk. She looked at what she had written for a long time. Then she opened a new document and began something different. Not testimony. Instructions. Practical, specific, written for someone who was carrying what she carried and had not yet found a way to hold it. For the child who would say to their parent, "I died in a fire a long time ago," and be told they were dreaming. For the adult who would describe a door with a worn brass handle and be referred to a different therapist. For anyone who had crossed the river dry and arrived in a life that did not have the right words for what they knew. She wrote until dawn. She did not publish it then. She was not ready, and she knew it. She put it away in the same place she put things that were true, but not yet speakable. And she went back to her patience and her work, and the ordinary layered texture of her days. She ran into R once, 2 years later, at a conference. He was there with a colleague, deep in conversation about something technical, and he glanced at her across the room with the expression of someone who can't place a familiar face. She nodded. He nodded back. They did not speak. She thought, next time. She was not sure if this was hope or resignation. She had learned, over 23 deaths and 34 years, that the difference between the two was smaller than people thought. Both were orientations toward a future you could not control. Both required you to release something. She released it. She got in a taxi. She looked out the window at the city moving past. A city she had lived in before, in a different century, though it looked nothing like that now. And she thought about the river and what it would feel like, finally, to drink from it. She thought it would feel like sleep. The deep kind. The kind you only got when you had been awake for a very long time. She wasn't ready yet. But she was, for the first time in 34 years, beginning to understand that ready was not a permanent state, that you moved toward it the way you moved toward sleep, not by trying, but by finally, gently, letting the weight of what you'd been carrying become too much to hold. The taxi moved through the city. The city held its dead and its living in the same air, the way all cities did. She breathed it in. She remembered every one of her lives. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Amara continued her practice for many years. She was known, among those who knew her, for a quality of presence that people found difficult to describe. Not wisdom exactly, and not warmth exactly, but something that felt like being seen by someone who had seen a great deal. The document she wrote that October night was found among her papers much later. The instructions, as she had called them. They were shared quietly, the way certain things are shared. Not published, not promoted, passed from hand to hand among people who recognized what they were reading. Some of them said it described their experience exactly. Some of them said it described something they had felt but never found words for. Some of them said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. The river of forgetting runs on. Most of us drink from it. Most of us arrive clean and unburdened and free to begin again. Most of us. Thank you for listening to Storytime Scary Dark. If something in that story felt familiar, if you've ever felt like a coat that didn't quite fit, perhaps you know more than you think. Follow the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.